You think your childhood was yours? The movies you loved, the characters you trusted, the stories that made you feel safe. You remember them as memories, moments that happened naturally, things you chose because they felt good. But what if those memories weren't accidental? What if they were placed there early, before skepticism, before comparison, before you could tell the difference between comfort and choice? Because when something enters your life early enough, it doesn't feel like influence. It feels familiar. And familiar things rarely get questioned. That's how identity forms, quietly, without permission. And once identity forms, it defends itself automatically. So who is shaping what you loved before you were old enough to notice? Disney is usually described as entertainment, movies, characters, theme parks. A company built around joy, imagination, and childhood wonder. That description feels harmless, comforting even, because it frames Disney as something passive, something you simply enjoy. But that framing hides the system underneath. Disney is not just selling stories, it is selling continuity. The company enters your life at the earliest possible moment, before taste forms, before skepticism develops, before you learn how to separate emotion from influence. By the time you're old enough to question repetition, pricing, or intent, the bond already exists. The characters feel familiar, the stories feel safe, the brand feels permanent. That permanence matters, because once something feels permanent, it stops needing to earn trust. It inherits it. This is not nostalgia by accident, it is ownership by timing. Emotion captured early does not fade naturally. It compounds, it deepens, it carries forward into adulthood without being reevaluated. And once a company owns the emotional layer of childhood, attention no longer has to be chased. It returns automatically, not because the product is better, but because the memory is already inside you. That is the stake. If emotion becomes property before logic develops, choice later is never neutral. It is preloaded. But when emotion is captured this early, who does it really end up serving? Most people believe Disney won because it told better stories, because creativity mattered more, because imagination earned loyalty on its own. That belief feels comforting. It says, success comes from talent, from magic, from luck. But Disney's advantage was not storytelling. It was sequence. Disney did not wait for adulthood to introduce meaning. It entered before taste existed, before identity stabilized, before the brain learned to separate comfort from truth. Psychologists call this imprinting. Early emotional reference points become permanent anchors. They shape what feels safe, what feels familiar, what feels trustworthy. Long after logic matures, Disney understood that if it became one of those anchors, persuasion later would be unnecessary. You would not need to be convinced. You would return automatically. That is why characters repeat, why melodies stay recognizable, why stories change form but never tone. Consistency was not creative weakness. It was emotional reinforcement. Each repetition strengthened the same bond. Each return refreshed the same feeling. Each remake protected the same memory. Every exposure lowered resistance. Every familiar image reduced friction. Every childhood moment became a reference point for adulthood. You did not compare Disney to alternatives. There were no alternatives. There was only what felt normal. And normal is powerful. Normal feels safe. Normal feels right. That normality was not accidental. It was reinforced deliberately, repeated until it disappeared from awareness. When something feels natural, it stops being examined. When it stops being examined, it stops being challenged. And that is the belief that breaks. Disney did not earn loyalty later. It planted it early, long before choice felt like choice, long before preference felt personal. And that changes how power works. Because first impressions never leave. They stay, they guide, they decide. Even when you think you moved on. You did not. You just forgot. But imprinting alone doesn't explain how memory quietly turns into money. Here's the uncomfortable part. Once emotional trust is formed early, it becomes difficult to question later. Notice how criticism of Disney feels different from criticism of other companies. It does not sound analytical. It sounds personal. That reaction is not accidental. It is the lock engaging. Disney does not just sell stories to children. It trains families to preserve them. Watching becomes tradition. Tradition becomes identity. And identity defends itself. even when prices rise, even when content repeats, even when alternatives exist. Walking away does not feel rational. It feels like loss. The fear is not missing a movie. It is losing connection to who you were, to what once felt safe. This is emotional lock-in, not enforced by contracts, not written into terms, but carried inside memory itself. And memory does something dangerous. It resists replacement. New stories struggle to compete. New brands feel unfamiliar. New experiences feel risky. You do not say no, you hesitate. That hesitation is valuable, not to you, to the system that benefits from predictability, because predictable attachment reduces friction. It lowers acquisition costs. It stabilizes demand. And slowly, choice narrows without disappearing. You can still choose, but only among things that preserve the bond. That is the mirror moment, where autonomy feels present, but influence is already complete. So where does comfort end and control quietly begin? Here is the rule most people never see. Disney did not stop at emotional ownership. It locked that ownership into structure. Most companies rely on hits. A successful product peaks. Then it fades. Disney refused fade. Every story was designed to connect forward. Movies introduce characters. Characters extend into merchandise. Merchandise leads to theme parks. Theme parks loop back into new stories. Nothing exists alone. Each experience refreshes the last one. Each touch point protects the memory before it can weaken. This is the hidden rule. Disney does not monetize attention. It monetizes continuity. When a child watches a film, that emotional imprint is not allowed to age. It is renewed through sequels, through remakes, through reboots, through live-action retellings. Each version keeps the feeling alive while extending its commercial life. Each iteration delays emotional expiration. Then comes the most powerful transfer. Parents introduce Disney to their children believing they are sharing something pure. But what they are actually passing down is brand trust. That is when the system becomes permanent. Disney no longer needs to acquire customers. It inherits them. At that point, pricing power stabilizes, subscriptions rise, park tickets climb, merchandise multiplies. Resistance stays low because the cost no longer feels financial. It feels emotional. You are not paying for access. You are paying to preserve connection. And connection is the hardest thing to walk away from. This is why Disney looks timeless instead of aggressive. The system never pressures you. It waits. It waits inside childhood, inside memory, inside identity. And once you see that, the machine becomes visible. If continuity creates permanent demand, what lesson does that hide for you? The lesson here is not that Disney is evil. It is that emotion compounds faster than logic. What feels safe early becomes unquestioned later. What feels familiar becomes trusted automatically. Disney exposes a rule that applies far beyond entertainment. Ownership beats persuasion. If you own the emotional layer, behavior follows quietly. That is why brands fight to enter lives early. Why habits formed young resist change. Why familiarity often feels like truth. The power is not manipulation. It is timing. Once you see this clearly, Disney stops looking magical. It starts looking precise. That clarity gives you leverage. You can ask better questions. Why do I trust this brand? When did that trust form? Was it earned or inherited? Understanding this does not require rejecting nostalgia. It requires recognizing when emotion is being rented back to you. Because when you see where attachment lives, you stop confusing comfort with choice. And that awareness shifts the balance. You are no longer inside the system unconsciously. You are standing next to it. That does not remove emotion. It restores control. So what changes when childhood stops deciding your adult choices? Disney's system matters more now because childhood no longer fades on its own. Streaming keeps stories active. Franchises never pause. Remakes prevent emotional decay. What once disappeared naturally with time is now refreshed deliberately. Memory is maintained on demand. That is why Disney's power feels quiet but unavoidable. It does not interrupt your life. It waits inside it. And this model did not stay isolated. Other companies learned the same lesson. Enter early, anchor emotion, extend continuity. Platforms want to be first. First app, first story, first habit. Because the first emotional reference point becomes the hardest to displace. Once attachment forms early, switching feels risky, even when alternatives are better. This is why modern competition no longer looks like rivalry. It looks like timing. Who arrives first? Who gets trusted before comparison begins? Disney did not just build entertainment. It demonstrated that shaping childhood shapes demand for decades. If memory can be engineered this early, can independence ever fully form later? This story is not about rejecting Disney. It is about seeing the system clearly. You do not need to erase nostalgia to regain control. You need awareness. When you understand how emotional ownership works, comfort stops pretending to be choice. You begin choosing deliberately instead of automatically. That is what RINH Wealth exists to do. Not to attack empires, but to decode them. Because the moment you see the system, it stops owning you. What other parts of your life were shaped before you ever chose them?